There's a new death toll tonight, confirming what many parents in Littleton, Colorado already knew. Columbine High School, the scene of so much violence and sadness, may never reopen this year. In the meantime, the search for evidence. Who were the two killers? How were they able to build bombs and dress the way they did, listen to German rock music as they did, without sounding alarms at home? And the scene overseas tonight, a high-rise is hit in Belgrade, but what did it house? And finally, the Army's much vaunted Apaches take almost a month to get there and get in the air. The problem with the Army's less than rapid response. Also, the reports tonight that NATO and the U.S. are rethinking ground troops yet again as the air war now enters day 30.
From NBC News, this is the news with Brian Williams.
And good Wednesday evening to you. Last night at this time, the coverage of what happened in Colorado was difficult for some to watch. Tonight, for 15 sets of parents in Littleton, Colorado, parents who now have an empty bedroom in their homes. It is now even worse as the process of making personal, positive identifications of the dead students is just now getting underway this evening. All of this in a suburb where virtually every house of worship is holding some sort of service tonight. We learned a lot more today about how it all took place. It is quite possible that the only people who really know why are dead, killed by their own guns. The death toll stands at 15. The high school may not reopen for the rest of the year. Some students say they will never walk in that building again at any time. Tonight, the parents of one of the young gunmen, Eric Harris, released a statement asking Americans to, quote, please say prayers for everyone touched by these horrible events. That would include their own son, whose motives and bizarre behavior, along with another troubled young man, apparently never fully dawned on the parents as potentially explosive. They are still sorting out this story tonight in Colorado, and to begin our coverage this evening, we are joined by NBC News correspondent George Lewis. George, good evening to you.
Good evening, Brian. It's taken so long to move the bodies out of the high school because of the devilish way the two assailants planted explosive devices throughout the school building, scattering them all over the place. Authorities were afraid to move the bodies because of the fear of booby traps. Finally, this afternoon, the all clear. This afternoon, the grim job of removing the bodies from Columbine High got underway as the parents of the dead students stayed in seclusion at an elementary school nearby. Their worst fears realized when all the victims were identified. One of the dead is Isaiah Scholes. His classmates said that the assailants were gunning for the blacks and the athletes at the school.
He had two strikes against him. He was black, and he was an athlete. That's why my son died. That's not a reason to die. That's not a reason to go.
The wait for the parents of the dead was lengthened as bomb experts painstakingly removed all the explosives planted around the school.
There is approximately 30 explosive devices that were found, but that includes at the homes, at the school, and out in some of the vehicles.
At a Catholic church a couple of miles from the school, they remembered the dead and tried to comfort the living.
There's no words anybody can say to comfort us. There's nothing anyone can do to get rid of this feeling but time.
Late this afternoon, school officials said Columbine High School will probably stay closed for the remainder of the year, that students will be bused to other schools.
I don't know if they'll reopen school. I don't know. Right now it's going to be so difficult for us to even step foot in the building, but I know as a faculty and as students we're going to have to do it at some point.
They're still questioning how it could happen here in this nice, quiet, middle-class community. The grieving process just beginning. That reaction, it just can't happen here, is typical, according to a grief counselor who's worked with victims' families in both the Oklahoma City bombing and the Springfield, Oregon school shootout. And now Littleton. And it has happened here. Brian?
George, tonight all three broadcast television evening news anchors were there within a few feet of your location for the sadness this has caused around the country. Millions looking on, millions reading about it. What is it like to be at the epicenter of so much sadness and upheaval?
Well, this is an entire community in the process of grieving and in process of mourning. There was a fairly large service this evening at the downtown Civic Center in Denver. Huge turnout there. Earlier today, a service here at the Catholic Church about 2 miles away from the school. 1,800 people there. People looking to their higher power, trying to find some answers tonight, Brian.
George Lewis, who was there on the ground reporting for us almost immediately after the shooting yesterday. Thank you, George, again. Tonight, as we touched on, there are so many unanswered questions about what happened here. Who were the two young suspects? How could they have possibly done such a thing? We get more on this tonight from NBC News correspondent Jim Avila, who's in Englewood, Colorado.
Brian, these boys were from good homes, good neighborhoods, good families. 3 of the 4 parents, professionals. One of them, a geologist. One, an educator. One, retired military. But somehow, most would agree, the boys went bad. And their friends tonight are saying that it was a violent turn from war games to real-life violence. These 2 boys, 18 days from summer break, one nearing graduation from an honored school, living in an upscale community, both parents at home, described as attentive and concerned.
They've just been nice people. I mean, it's like you can't put blame on them at all. It's Dylan's choice, and no one knows why he made that choice.
So how did Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold become America's most notorious killers, murdering classmates with a weapons cache that includes 30 bombs planted inside and outside their school, 2 sawed-off shotguns, 1 handgun, 1 carbine rifle?
Well, they were laughing about killing people, and it was like they having the time of their life.
Those who knew these teens best say the trenchcoat mafia is more than just black clothes. These boys were dangerously strange.
You could tell he hated a lot of people. You could tell there's just a lot of hate in him.
Both Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold had trouble with the law. Arrested as juveniles last year on charges of breaking and entering a car, they finished probation just 2 months ago. And NBC News has learned from close associates, both boys were fascinated by guns, watching the movie Natural Born Killers over and over again. And 1 month ago, the boys went to the hills near their suburban Denver homes to videotape themselves shooting high-powered guns. This young girl, a close friend and rare female member of the Trenchcoat Mafia group, says Eric and Dylan were mesmerized by war and spent their lunch hours on war games.
Because of the way that it was done, they knew beforehand exactly what was going to happen.
And at home spent hours on the computer adding even more violence to Doom, a medieval war game. Both dabbled in German, and their music was foreign, the dark heavy metal of Rammstein. Does all that add up to a murder spree? Most of the time, no. And tonight, this community wants to know why it did this time. Brian?
Jim Avila outside the medical center there that treated so many of the trauma patients, the wounded after the shooting. Our next guest is a student at Columbine High School. Lindsay Hamilton, who is 15, was in the science hall for hours when the shooting started and thereafter. Lindsay is with us now from Littleton, Colorado. And Lindsay, it's the first time we've spoken. Thank you for making time to come on the air. It must be a horrible time for you and your friends. And why don't you tell us your story, beginning with the first sounds of shots you heard, I guess.
We were in science getting ready to take a test, and we heard all this screaming and running, and the building was shaking. And some teachers told us to get back in the classroom because they had guns. And so we got back in our classroom, and our teacher took us into this little storage room greenhouse, and we all got in there. It was about 30 of us plus our teacher, and huddled down and covered our heads. And we could hear all these gunshots and pipe bombs forever. And then we heard them yelling, and they said I want to die today, and today's a good day for everybody to die. And we just heard more gunshots. And then we didn't hear anything for a long time. And then we heard a little bit more gunfire. And then we just waited for about 2 hours. And then finally the SWAT team came and rescued us, and we were taken through the school, and we had to see all the bombs where they left their mark, and we had to step around a body somewhere. And then finally we got taken with the police and away from the school. But it had been about 4 hours since we...
You know, I was just going to say, every student, just like you, has an amazing and heroic story to tell about their teacher. In your case, your teacher kept his or her cool, and they got you into shelter. Many other teachers pulled off absolutely heroic deeds.
Yeah, my teacher, Miss Williams, was absolutely calm and positive the whole time.
And how did you know, a very basic question, that when the SWAT team members came in, they were really the good guys?
We didn't know. We had absolutely no idea, and we just kind of took an instinct and decided they were good people.
We hear your school is going to be closed for the rest of the school year. Are any people saying it should never be reopened because of the memories in there? They should tear it down, start over?
I don't know. I have no idea.
How are you doing mentally tonight, or don't you kind of know yet?
I don't really know. I'm still shocked and terrified.
How are you missing any friends? Did your friends all get out?
Yes, everybody that I'm really close to has gotten out.
But it's probably going to turn out, correct, that you knew some of the dead students?
Yeah, I don't know any names of the dead students, so I don't know.
And who's helping you to try to talk about this and to listen to you maybe and get all of you folks over this?
Right now, I'm just really talking to my family, and they're helping out a lot.
Have counselors offered you their services?
Yeah, my school counselor helped me right away.
And do you think you'll go back for more?
Yeah, I do.
Do you think have you attended any of the religious services around town, and do you think they're supposed to help this feeling that you're going through there in Littleton greatly?
I haven't been to one yet, so I don't know yet. I'm sure they're helping everybody, though.
Can you step back yet and look at your school and realize that the whole nation is watching you? One of your fellow students said here on television last night that this isn't supposed to happen in school. And do you think you'll be able to feel secure again when you go to school?
No, never. It's unsafe.
Do you realize what a tragedy that is to hear a young person say that in America in 1999?
Yeah.
Well, on that, Lindsay, best of luck to you. Thank you for talking about it on television with us tonight.
Yeah.
We have a lot more to tell you about as we continue this Wednesday evening, including in our next half hour as we continue here what college campuses are saying and doing about the shooting at this high school that has broken apart a community in Littleton, Colorado. But next up, what one of the members of this so-called group, the Trenchcoat Mafia, had to say about yesterday's shootings at her school. The sadness that is everywhere in this Colorado town. Before the authorities had confirmed anything yesterday in Littleton, Colorado, students who survived the shootings at Columbine High School were saying they recognized the gunmen as members of what they called the Trenchcoat Mafia, a well-known group of not quite mainstream students known for their dress style, their swagger, their attitude. Reporter Ward Lucas of the NBC television station KUSA-TV in Denver was one of the first to report on this. We aired his work here last night. We're happy to have him joining us tonight from Denver, and we're happy to also thank KUSA once again through Ward for providing the superb coverage of the unfolding tragedy yesterday. Ward, good evening to you.
Good evening.
How did your day progress as a reporter? How did you latch on to the first thread, then know enough to branch out and pursue this one group?
Well, the first thing that we did was we headed down to the neighborhood. Police roadblocks were going up everywhere, and the idea was to get as many of our news crews into place around the school as possible before streets started getting shut down. But my partner and I on the investigative team just went street by street looking for people who were out walking. We learned probably within a few minutes the names of the two shooters, although we didn't feel comfortable releasing that until much later in the evening. But just moving from person to person as quickly as we could. We got a very good idea very rapidly, as did virtually every other news crew on the scene, what had happened inside the high school. And of course, at that point, we were getting news reports from the various radio stations.
And I know you brought along tonight, so to speak, the latest report you prepared.
Yes. We talked to some of the people involved in the incident down there, and we'll take a look at that story now.
Today, the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office went to the home of Dylan Klebold in Deer Creek Canyon. His family is obviously well-to-do. Their home is an expensive one in an exclusive neighborhood. One of the objectives today was to locate additional bomb-making materials that Klebold and Harris had used. On South Reed Street, we talked to Bill Conan, a neighbor of the Harris family, who says he was there Monday morning, a time when kids should have been in school. He saw Eric and Dylan and heard something odd going on in the garage of the Harris home.
I heard someone ask for a baseball bat, and then shortly after that I heard this repetitive crashing sound, like someone breaking glass, like bottles or something.
A former member of the trenchcoat group at Columbine said Eric and Dylan were her friends, as were some of those who were shot.
I know how sweet they were. I know how good they were. And I saw Dylan with the gun, and I saw Dylan with the grenades and the stuff. I saw the wounded. I saw all that they did. And I'm not able to even accept the fact that there's that many people dead in my school. Because of the way that it was done, they knew beforehand exactly what was going to happen. They knew that there was going to be cops swarming the school. They knew that this wouldn't last for more than a couple hours. They knew all this before they ever got anything, before they ever started building anything.
So it was carefully planned?
It was very carefully planned. It would have had to have been. Because of how they were, what they knew, what they have done. They have studied things like they've done paintball. They've done paintball so seriously that it's been almost like a real war situation.
And yet this is the kind of guys that could just be friends in a friendly group like that, huh?
Yeah, they were great friends. They were great friends. They were some of the sweetest guys to know. But they had the ability in them to do this. And they chose to do it.
The big mystery here from our standpoint, Brian, is how these two individuals got so many munitions into the school. Obviously, they had to have stored them inside in lockers. They had something like 30 pipe bombs, half a dozen rifles, and who knows how much ammunition they had. But the big mystery is whether or not they had some inside help. There is an ongoing investigation now looking at other members of their closely knit association of trenchcoat mafia members. Now, again, we got to keep in mind, not all the trenchcoat mafia people who the kids at Columbine High School knew were part of this group. It was just a very small number, but the big investigation now surrounds them.
Ward Lucas from KUSA tonight. Thank you very much, Ward. We'll have more from Colorado after this break. One question repeatedly being asked about the massacre in Littleton, Colorado is what could have been done to stop it. As NBC News correspondent Ann Thompson reports, there were warning signs from the two boys suspected of being the gunmen here.
Tonight, we are still learning about the teenage gunman in Littleton. But after 10 school shootings in 3 years, there is more detail and a profile developing of kids who kill kids.
They decide that they're going to take others and die themselves. Death to them is a reward. It's not a punishment.
Criminologist Bill Reisman started studying these kids after the October 1997 shooting in Pearl, Mississippi. 7 students injured, 2 killed. He sees a connection between Pearl shooter Luke Woodham and the Colorado gunman.
Their belief system is almost identical. They were, the neo-Nazi interest, the German interest. And that wasn't only true of Luke Woodham, that was also true of the 5 and 6 others that were involved in that situation.
Trauma psychologist Robert Butterworth says, though parents may not notice them, the signs of trouble start early.
Many of these kids show problems from birth.
Signs like fighting in preschool, trouble in class, social outcast by the age of 10. The psychological profile of Michael Carneal, who killed 3 students in West Paducah, Kentucky, reveals a boy taunted by classmates, called geek and nerd, teased that he had cooties and Michael germs. The report describes one early warning sign. 2 months before the December 1997 shooting, Michael took his father's revolver to school and showed it to classmates. He told a psychiatrist it made him feel safe.
A bitter kid without a gun equals a fist fight in a hallway of a school. A gun and a kid who is not bitter equals an afternoon of hunting with his father. Put the two together and you have the potential for a massacre.
But it's more than guns. The suspects in Littleton, like Carneal, were skilled on the internet, where they could seek support from similar outcasts.
We have kids now that have means to fulfill these destructive fantasies. They can go into the internet, they can learn how to build a bomb, they can save up money and buy a gun. It's not that difficult.
And the smallest thing can ignite a deadly rage. After the Jonesboro shooting, when 2 boys killed a teacher and 4 kids, when asked why, one of them said his accomplice was simply mad at a teacher. While they don't know what set off the massacre in Littleton, experts say the reason will never justify the worst school shooting in American history. Ann Thompson, NBC News, Chicago.
When our coverage of this continues, we'll be joined by one of Littleton's bravest, a member of the SWAT team who entered that building not knowing what they had inside.
A town mourns. A nation searches for answers. For ongoing coverage of the Colorado school shooting, stay with MSNBC on cable and the internet.
The badly needed food and rations being handed out to those in need, with Albania and Macedonia already overwhelmed with refugees and hundreds of thousands of displaced ethnic Albanians still trying to get out of Kosovo somehow. The pressure is on for other countries to help out. Well, today, Vice President Gore announced the U.S. would accept up to 20,000 Kosovars on the U.S. mainland in this country, instead of at the U.S. military base at Guantanamo Bay as originally proposed. The idea is to place the refugees with family members here or with American volunteers, a lot more comfortable than the ill-defined camp-like surroundings on a hot, sweltering island as the administration first proposed. Meanwhile, the NATO air campaign in Yugoslavia is, according to NATO, close to turning a corner now with the arrival of some new air power after weeks of waiting for the U.S. Army to deliver those Apaches. And talk, so far just talk, of ground troops now. We get the latest this evening from NBC News Pentagon correspondent Jim Miklashevsky on duty at the Pentagon tonight.
After 2 weeks of anticipation, the first Apache attack helicopters arrived today in Albania. Ground hugging with deadly firepower, these 2-man killing machines could be ready for combat against Serb forces in Kosovo by next week. But they can't win the war.
We should not look to the Apaches as being some kind of a silver bullet, that this is a magic solution to the problem of the Serb forces.
But they are the closest thing yet to a ground war. After 4 weeks of airstrikes with no end in sight, the White House and NATO are updating plans for ground troops, just in case NATO is forced to fight its way into Kosovo.
It's certainly a prudent thing to do to keep your assessments updated based on the situation.
And in the latest NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, 71% of those polled believe NATO will have to use American ground troops to win the war. But more than half are opposed to keeping troops inside Kosovo for more than a year. At the same time, there are huge obstacles and tremendous risks to the use of ground troops at this stage of the war. It could take well over a month to assemble some 300,000 troops, and they'd have to cross rugged mountains to fight a Serb force firmly dug into Kosovo. Casualties would be high.
Sending in ground troops will clearly be a disaster.
Meanwhile, NATO is taking the air war downtown to the center of Belgrade, hitting targets that keep President Slobodan Milosevic in power, hitting his Socialist Party headquarters and a Serb TV and radio station that spread Milosevic propaganda. And there's a holdup tonight in that pending request for 33,000 reserve troops to join the war. Seems that there's no place to put them all. So by the time the president signs the order, the final number will be less than 20,000. Jim Miklashevsky, NBC News, the Pentagon.
And we return now to the other major story of this day and evening, the aftermath at the high school massacre, Littleton, Colorado. Federal agents found a staggering number of firearms and explosives in and around the crime scene, raising questions about how the two young suspects could have possibly amassed and worked on such an arsenal themselves. Here with more on this, NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams in our Washington bureau. Pete?
Brian, the investigators say that the bombs spanned a range of the way they were built. Some were simple pipe bombs, others were creative, investigators say, cleverly made to get the maximum damage from a limited amount of explosive material. They say these are not the kind of designs that beginning bomb makers usually come up with. So they say whoever built them spent lots of time thinking about the designs and had very good instructions, likely investigators say, from the internet. None of the bombs used high explosive like dynamite. They were instead made with common gunpowder, which is easily found at sporting goods stores and is legal for juveniles, underage, children to buy. Some bombs used powder from fireworks. And the components, investigators say, were commonly available. Now, as surprising as it may be, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms says young people are actually responsible for hundreds of bombings every year. In the past 5 years, they say, juveniles were to blame for more than 4,500 bomb incidents, a third of all bombings nationwide, and their bombs turned out to be very effective, Brian, successfully exploding nearly 90% of the time.
Pete Williams in the Washington bureau. Pete, thanks for that.
Yes, sir.
Our next guest tonight is a member of one of the SWAT teams who were on the front lines yesterday at the high school. George Hinkle, along with his Lakewood, Colorado team of colleagues, arrived on the scene an hour after the first shots were fired, helped some of the students get out of the building safely before eventually securing the building themselves. He joins us tonight from Littleton, Colorado, and I know you're not supposed to let your job go home with you or bother you in your off hours. What's it done to your head since you walked in there yesterday?
It's tough. It's hard to sleep at night, and fortunately we've got a good staff of police psychologists that debrief us. They told us to expect that. They told us that we very likely have nightmares for a couple of weeks, and after that, if we continue to have problems, then we should go back and talk to them some more.
For people who thought, you know, in this era of no attention span, people who thought your job took too long inside there, perhaps you could give us a reminder of the fact that once opening the door of that building, you didn't know what you had in there. To your knowledge, you could have had a group of heavily armed men with rocket launchers.
Exactly, and that's exactly what we did think initially. We had literally hundreds of students running out. They were all seeing suspects, seeing people shot. I mean, of course, that tends to multiply. So when we went into this, we went in fully expecting a full military-type opponent, and that's not something that you can go in piecemeal.
You were wearing body armor, of course, I presume, but still, that doesn't make you invulnerable, correct?
Absolutely correct. The personal body armor that we carry with us will protect us against handgun fire. It's not complete protection against any sort of rifle or assault fire, and that's the type of weapons that we thought we were probably up against.
Worst thing you've ever seen on the job, I presume?
Absolutely.
Do you have any school-age children of your own?
Yes, I do. I've got a boy and a girl, and they're just a year younger than the students that we saw yesterday.
So that was absolutely on your mind all the way through.
It sure was. Very tough.
What method do you use? You enter a building, there were several teams. We saw a lot of you swarming around the grounds and inside the high school proper. How do you go through a series of, well, this quadrant is clear, we've checked it, we've sealed it off?
What we wound up doing yesterday was basically dividing the building into quadrants, and we would have one team from one jurisdiction clear one quadrant, while another team from another jurisdiction cleared another quadrant. And that seemed to work out fairly well.
George, how did you know among each other that you were friendlies, and how did you convincingly announce yourselves to the teachers who were huddling their students as a friendly and not one of the shooters?
In terms of the teachers and the students, most of them were looking for help. So as soon as they saw somebody that remotely looked friendly, we identified ourselves verbally as police, then they were more than willing to come out to us. In terms of identifying ourselves to each other so we didn't get caught in crossfire situations. We have hand signals and loud verbal signals coming out before we actually exit a particular door that we've cleared.
I know you've heard the stories of the incredible, ordinary and yet extraordinary acts of heroism by these teachers who just started off a normal school day and ended up sheltering and saving the lives of these students. Which one sticks out in your head?
I've heard a number of those as well, and I think that the initial response from the people down in the cafeteria, where it's my understanding that the suspects came in, was particularly remarkable. I think just in terms of getting the kids together and getting them out in a very chaotic situation, I think my hat's off to every one of them.
Were you surprised that this amount of heavy fire was the product of 2 high school kids in the end?
Yes, very surprised. We thought it was a full military-style operation based on the initial reports, and to hear it was only 2 kids was very surprising.
George Hinkle, hats off to you for the professionalism you all displayed yesterday. A national audience was watching and realizing the same thing. Thank you very much on this night after for coming on the air with us.
Thank you, sir.
And coming up as we continue here, the impact of the shooting in the Littleton High School on college campuses across the country. Tragedies like the shooting in Colorado yesterday and the continuing conflict in Yugoslavia often spark intense debates across the country, oftentimes on college campuses. But lately, particularly on the subject of Kosovo, the pictures of college-age protesters marching against U.S. military action in a foreign land have been absent from the political landscape. For some perspective on that, the college campus these days, and the school shooting in Colorado, we are joined by the editors of 2 daily college newspapers. Adam Lasker is senior at the University of Wisconsin at Madison and is the editor-in-chief of the Cardinal newspaper. He is with us tonight from Madison. And in Cleveland, we're joined by Mike Lebowitz, a senior at Kent State University, an institution with an indelible place in U.S. wartime history. Mike is the editor of the daily Kent Stater. And Mike, I'd like to begin with you. You are young, yes, but as a journalist and a student there, it must be ingrained in you the history of Kent State, the black and white images of the woman calling for help over the fallen student.
Oh, of course it is. I mean, you know, of course.
And
it's happened. Yeah.
I guess you have the perspective.
I'm sorry,
no, I guess you have the perspective to realize it's how many Americans of a certain age still define Kent State as the first thing you think of if you live through that era.
Oh, yeah.
When you hear the name. And how does that affect the college psyche, your newspaper, all of the cultural things there?
Well, I'll tell you, like, when you're out of town, such as Washington, D.C., where I interned at, pretty much you say, I go to Kent State. Oh, that's where the people got shot at. And people, you know, think of Kent State, think of a bunch of hippies running up a hill, is what I've heard many times. So, I mean, I'm sure it affects the university at all, and I've heard rumors that they're trying to get away from the name Kent State and trying to call it Kent now. They changed the logo in the 80s. And
now, Neil Young, of course, immortalized the school with his lyric, For Dead in Ohio. You know, people must assume that it's still some kind of hotbed of protest. What has happened, if anything, on campus since, say, Kosovo?
That's the funny part of all, is nothing. Pretty much there's a group of people that always come and protest everything. I mean, if you remember February 1998 with Iraq, I mean, everybody came out of the woodwork. There was hundreds and hundreds of people protesting. But now there's just nobody, like nobody is acknowledging Kosovo. For example, the only thing that protested was today, more Animal Rights Week, something like that. But nobody mentioned the word Kosovo. I found it kind of interesting.
And Adam, over to you. What experience can you speak to, especially since Kosovo, going back to the Gulf War as well, perhaps?
Well, I wasn't in college when the Gulf War happened, but, you know, we do have quite a history at Madison of severe protests from the Vietnam time. Just like at Kent State, it's been relatively quiet around here, especially compared to the Vietnam days. However, things were peaceful at the beginning of the Vietnam era as well. There have been some protests on campus, only one, I believe, that even measured in the hundreds of people. So it's a little bit quieter as far as the demonstrations outside. They've been happening almost on a weekly basis, but they are not loud and they are not huge.
And now to the situation in Colorado. You're not significantly older than high school age, either of you. And Adam, beginning with you, is any of the behavior that you're hearing about, these two men, the kind of German acid rock music that they listen to, this kind of castle-era behavior and the games and the CD-ROMs?
Well, I played some role-playing games when I was in high school, and computers were definitely becoming a part of my culture. But I hate to see that the whole, I've heard them described as gothic, and I hate seeing that whole crowd of people get targeted just because a couple of kids went into a high school and started shooting up the place. I don't think that had anything to do with specifically their subculture. Everybody likes their music, everybody has their hobbies, and for these kids it was acid rock, but I know a lot of people who listen to music like that who are peaceful and friendly people as well.
That's right, nor do we want to paint with the same broad brush. And Mike, how do you expect to handle the shooting in Colorado editorially? Is there an object lesson for college campuses in it?
Yeah, the best thing to do, is that it can happen anywhere, and that's why I think more people on campus talk about this as opposed to Kosovo, is because, this is like close to home. It can happen anywhere, and that's what we're pretty much trying to stress. Like if you remember a couple years ago at Penn State University, which is a college campus, obviously, a girl matted down right in the middle of the student center there and just started picking off people with a shotgun. So, pretty much trying to drive home the point that you can't single out a certain group of people, like for, in this instance, trench coats or gothic people, because, that's not always going to be the case, and you can't even think to, single out one group of person.
Well, that's right, and that's one of the lessons here. Mike Leibowitz, Kent State, thank you. Adam Lasker, University of Wisconsin, thanks and good luck to you both.
Thank you.
When we come back, the Chicago Sun-Times decision not to put yesterday's school shooting on their front page. The sheer tragedy in Colorado, the coverage of it last night drew millions of viewers, more people drawn to this network alone than at the height of the Clinton scandal during the start of the air war over Kosovo. However, there are concerns about the coverage. Some wish it hadn't been covered at all. The local sheriff in Colorado said yesterday, quote, "If this is broadcast across the country, other people may get the same idea," close quote. Because of those very concerns, one major city daily newspaper decided today to forego the shocking headlines and to put the story on the inside pages instead, where children wouldn't be able to see it. The paper is the Chicago Sun-Times, and its editor-in-chief, Nigel Wade, is with us tonight from Chicago. Nigel, what was the reaction to your decision?
It was the strong support that we got the last time we did it after the shootings at Springfield, Oregon, May last year. The same kind of expression of we're relieved, we're grateful, parents particularly identifying themselves, doctors, teachers. I had a teacher call in and say, I'm just about to step into a class and try and explain this to my pupils. Thank you very much for treating the story the way we did.
How much, honestly, of a newspaper's decision to put a story on the front page is to sell papers, plainly, and how much is it a public service aspect of what we do for a living?
I've got three responsibilities, I suppose. First, a duty to tell the news so that people can make their decisions in life. Second, I have a duty, of course, to the commercial well-being of the paper. I don't want to send the paper bankrupt. And third, I have a duty to the society as a whole. And every day, in some small way, you end up balancing those three responsibilities.
Now, devil's advocate, a very dramatic and serious-looking President Clinton went on television for the third time after this Colorado thing today, and he said, in part, we want to hammer home the message across America and to American students that violence is wrong. It was noted today, this is the same president who is in the middle of an air war that has accidentally killed civilians overseas, and you, I note, put atrocities on the front page. Can't reading about that be as damaging in its own way to children?
Well, I'm not advocating any kind of good news policy. I'm not trying to run a sugary good news newspaper.
Understood.
We will always have to report the ugly things that happen in the world, but and wars will, unfortunately, apparently, always be part of that. But when children start to make war on their classmates, that's another thing altogether, and I believe it raises other questions.
Your coverage as an amount was unaffected by your decision. It just moved in location, correct?
Yeah, we didn't cut anything or leave anything out. We used the same words and the same pictures as other papers, I expect. We put them inside on pages 2, 3, and 4, where adults would find them, but we just took the story out of the white-hot spotlight on page 1.
I want to thank you for coming on. We're happy to give you the time to discuss this on the air tonight. Nigel Wade of the Chicago Sun-Times.
Thank you.
When we come back, we're going to take a look at the Thursday morning newspaper headlines around the country this Wednesday night, including the latest effect this shooting has had on the city of Denver, Colorado. Lead stories in major papers in major cities across the country, of course, the school shooting in Colorado, the situation in Kosovo. We wanted to show you some headlines you wouldn't normally see tomorrow morning, perhaps, both of them from the Denver Post. The first says NRA scales back Denver convention. Although Charlton Heston was on morning television in Los Angeles just hours after the triggers were pulled in Colorado, defending the right to bear arms, the NRA is going to do a little less during their 3-day convention in Denver, as not to try to call too much attention to themselves. And also, Denver Post, city officials move to cancel concert. This is on the front page tomorrow morning. Denver city officials are asking promoters to cancel a concert by Marilyn Manson, the group, scheduled to be held in Denver April 30th. It has been speculated that the two shooters were fans of Marilyn Manson, and perhaps his music could have in some way contributed to their state of mind. No direct evidence, of course, that there is any correlation in any of this. Before we go here this evening, a reminder coming up next on a special edition of Hockenberry. Tom Brokaw reporting live from Littleton, Colorado, while John Hockenberry will be reporting on the crisis in Kosovo live from Albania. And at 11 o'clock tonight, 8 Pacific, a special edition of our nightly broadcast, NBC News special report on the conflict in Yugoslavia. And we will update the situation in the Balkans, look further into the shootings in Colorado. That's it for us this Wednesday night. We hope to see you back here tomorrow. I'm Brian Williams. Good night, everybody.
The News with Brian Williams is a presentation of NBC News. More Americans watch NBC News than any other news organization in the world.